I never thought that the day I buried my only son would end up being the day I truly lost my home too. Standing by his casket, I could barely keep my legs from giving out. My fingers trembled against the polished wood, my knees buckling under the weight of 35 years of memories. All I wanted was one last moment with him, to apologize for every harsh word, to tell him he was the only thing I ever did right. But before I could even finish my silent prayer, I heard her voice, sharp, slicing through the chapel like a cold blade. "I won't be looking after that old witch," Casey spat, loud enough for the other mourners to hear. I flinched. The words stung worse than the biting July wind cutting through the ivy-covered walls. Casey didn't bother to lower her voice. She stood there in her sleek black dress, her hair pinned just so, scanning the guests for sympathetic glances. And she got them too. People leaned in, whispering, pitying her. Not me, never me. I looked around for someone, anyone, to meet my eyes, to share my grief. But all I saw were averted gazes, hands tightening around paper programs, as if I were an inconvenience at my own son's funeral. That's when it hit me. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. When we got home, Casey barely waited for the door to close before she started pacing around the living room, her heels echoing off the walls that still smelled faintly of my son's aftershave. She turned to me, her eyes cold and hungry. "I've been waiting for this. I'll sell this place the second the paperwork clears. God knows I deserve some freedom after putting up with him, and you, for so long." I felt my rosary beads slip through my fingers, clacking softly against the floor. I wanted to scream, to tell her that this was my home, the place I poured my soul into after my husband died, where I raised my boy alone, praying every night that he'd be safe, that he'd live a life better than mine. But no words came out. My throat closed up, my heart pounded against my ribs like it wanted to escape. I sank into the couch, staring at the dusty family photos on the mantel. My son's shy graduation smile, his first car keys in his hand, that trip to the lake when he was 13, the one where he swore he'd protect me forever. Casey didn't even glance at them. She just marched upstairs, probably to call her realtor, her lawyer, maybe even her hairdresser. Anyone who would listen to her sob story about the old hag she was forced to tolerate for years. I sat there in the darkening living room, the sunset throwing long, accusatory shadows across the floor. I could hear her laughter drifting down the stairs, sharp and triumphant. And for the first time in my life, I realized, love without respect is just a slow, quiet death. I had given everything, my youth, my health, every last ounce of warmth I had, to that house, that son, and in the end, none of it meant a damn thing. The moment it all changed wasn't when my son died. It was when I understood, with a cold finality, that I didn't have anyone left who would fight for me. I had to decide whether I would die quietly in that chair, or finally stand up for myself. I wiped the tears from my cheeks with shaking hands. In that instant, something inside me cracked, or maybe it finally mended. I wasn't sure yet, but I knew one thing. I would never beg again. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Casey's voice drifting in through the cracked bedroom door. I knew that tone too well. Sweet as syrup on the surface, rotten underneath. I shuffled down the hallway, gripping the banister like it was the only thing keeping me from collapsing. My body still felt heavy from the funeral, my mind foggy with grief. But Casey's words sliced right through that fog. "I'm telling you, as soon as this paperwork is in my hands, I'm listing that house. I want every dime I can get. I've earned it putting up with that cranky old ghost," she said, her laugh sharp and metallic. Silence on the other end of the line. Then a low, conspiratorial giggle from whoever she was talking to. My hands curled into fists. My son hadn't even been gone a full week, and already she was carving up his legacy like a Sunday roast. I pressed my ear closer. "No, I don't care what she thinks," Casey continued, her voice dripping contempt. "She should be grateful I didn't toss her into a nursing home years ago. She's useless now. No income, no power, just dead weight." A coldness washed over me so deep it felt like my bones turned to ice. All those dinners I cooked for her, the birthday gifts I wrapped, the nights I sat up worrying when she and my son argued, all of it meant nothing. I thought back to when Casey first came into our lives. She was charming then, so quick to help me carry groceries in, to compliment my cooking. I mistook it for love. Now I saw it clearly. She had always been measuring me, plotting her angles. I shuffled back into the kitchen and sank into my son's old chair at the table. My fingers traced the nicks on the edge, marks from when he used to do his homework here, banging his pencil in frustration over algebra problems. I felt the tears rising, but this time, I didn't let them fall. Instead, I forced myself to remember the quiet warnings, the way my son's eyes would dart to Casey nervously at dinner, the times he changed the subject when she snapped at me. He tried to protect me in his own gentle way, but he was too soft, too kind to stand up to her completely. I thought I could keep the peace by staying quiet. I thought if I loved enough, forgave enough, they would see my worth. But love without respect is a leash. Casey's laughter drifted into the kitchen again, each giggle a slap to my face. "Finally," she said. "Finally, I'll have my freedom. I'm not gonna let that shriveled-up old woman ruin what's left of my life." I looked around the kitchen, the floral curtains I sewed when my son was 10, the chipped mug he gave me for Mother's Day that I still used every morning. Memories layered over every inch like soft dust, and she was going to rip it all away. For the first time in decades, I felt something inside me harden, like steel forging itself in a flame I never knew I carried. I might have been old, I might have been alone, but I wasn't as powerless as she believed. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking, my hands gripping the table for balance. I didn't know yet how I would fight her, but I knew one thing as clear as the sunrise burning through that kitchen window. I wasn't going to let her take the last piece of my life without a fight. That night, the house felt emptier than it ever had. I wandered into my son's old study, the room he once called his kingdom. The door creaked open, and the familiar scent of old books and dust hit me all at once. I stood there for a moment, frozen at the threshold, as if stepping inside meant stepping into a past I wasn't sure I could bear. His trophies still lined the shelves. That small soccer trophy from when he was 8, the science fair ribbon he won in middle school, the framed photo of him in his graduation gown, his eyes squinting from the sun, but glowing with pride. I let my fingers drift across each one, my skin tingling like I was touching tiny shards of my heart. I thought back to those years after his father died. My husband left us too soon, a heart attack in the middle of the night that left me gasping for air, and my boy sobbing in the hallway, too young to understand why his daddy wouldn't wake up. I worked double shifts at the diner downtown, sometimes 3 if I could get them, just to keep the lights on and food in the pantry. I remembered slipping $1 into his lunch bag, telling him to buy something sweet because I couldn't afford to bake cookies. I remembered coming home to find him asleep on the couch, his tiny arm draped around the TV remote, waiting for me. He never complained. Not once. He always looked at me like I was a superhero, like my tired bones and threadbare aprons were somehow magic. Then Casey came into our lives. At first, she seemed like a blessing. She brought flowers when she visited, called me Mom right away, and always knew just the right words to make me feel included. But slowly, the warmth in her eyes started to turn. She would roll her eyes when I reminded her to pick up milk, make snide comments about my outdated clothes, insist on updating the house in ways that erased pieces of our story, new curtains, new paint, new furniture, until I barely recognized my own home. I watched my son shrink around her. His shoulders seemed to sag lower each year, his laughter fading to a quiet murmur I could barely hear from the kitchen. He'd defend her, though, always. "She's just stressed, Mom," he would say, rubbing his temples. "She's trying her best." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to keep the family together so badly that I let my own needs vanish. Sitting there now, I realized how far I had allowed myself to disappear. In that quiet, I heard my son's voice in my head. "I'll always protect you, Mom. I promise." A promise he wanted to keep. I truly believed that. Maybe he didn't have the strength to fight her when he was alive, but maybe he tried to leave me something behind. A shiver ran down my spine. Something didn't feel finished. I looked at the old desk, cluttered with papers he never got around to filing. My fingers itched to start sorting, but fear and exhaustion rooted me to the chair. I sat there, staring at the trophies, at the ghost of my son's hopes and dreams, and felt the first real flicker of something new. Not just grief, not just anger, determination. In that room, with my son's spirit breathing around me, I swore to myself, I wouldn't let Casey erase me. I wouldn't let her erase him. Even if I had to stand alone, I would protect what we built. The next morning, I found the letter wedged under the front door, the corner smudged from the morning dew. I held it in my hands for a long moment, feeling its weight, heavier than any bill or condolence card I'd received since the funeral. It was from Samuel Curtis, my son's lawyer. My heart hammered in my chest as I peeled it open, each tear in the envelope sounding like thunder in my ears. "Dear Mrs. Thatcher," it began, "as per your late son Daniel's last will and testament, you are the sole beneficiary of his estate, including the house at 17 Westfield Lane, all financial assets, and personal belongings. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience to finalize the necessary paperwork." I read it again and again. I didn't realize I had sunk to the floor until I felt the cold linoleum biting into my knees. My hands trembled so hard I could barely keep the paper steady. My son, my sweet boy. He had protected me in the only way he knew how. Even if he couldn't stand up to Casey when he was alive, he had found a way to shield me in the end. I pressed the letter to my chest and let out a sound, something between a sob and a laugh. But before the warmth of relief could settle into my bones, I heard the front door slam. Casey's sharp voice cut through the hallway like a blade. "Where is she?" I scrambled to my feet, shoving the letter into my apron pocket, just as she came storming into the kitchen. Her eyes locked onto mine, her nostrils flaring like a bull ready to charge. "What the hell is this?" she screeched, waving her phone in the air. Her fingers were white from gripping it so tight. I shrank back against the counter, my hand fumbling for the edge as though it might keep me steady. "Casey, don't you Casey me," she spat. Her voice cracked with fury, her face twisted into something monstrous. "You think you can steal my house? You think you can just waltz in here, old and pathetic, and take everything from me?" I felt the letter burning in my pocket, its edges crinkling under my trembling fingers. I didn't know. I didn't," I whispered, my voice barely leaving my throat. Casey stepped closer. So close I could smell the cheap perfume she always drowned herself in. "My lawyer just called," she hissed. "You think you're clever? You think you can hide behind some dusty old will? I have rights too. I was his wife. I sacrificed everything." I looked at her, really looked at her, the rage in her eyes, the desperation just beneath the surface. She wasn't mourning my son. She was mourning her lost control, her lost money. And in that moment I saw the truth. She never loved him. She only loved what he could give her. "You don't deserve a single thing he left," I said, my voice shaking but firm, surprising even me. For a second, she looked stunned, as if she hadn't expected me to speak at all. Then her expression twisted further, venom pooling in her eyes. "Oh, you're going to regret this," she snarled. "I'll make sure everyone knows what a senile old witch you are. You think a piece of paper will save you? I'll fight you until you have nothing left." I stood frozen as she stormed out, her shrieks echoing through the hallway, rattling the framed photos on the walls. When the door finally slammed shut behind her, I collapsed back against the counter, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My hands reached for the letter again. It felt like a lifeline, a final love letter from my son, telling me, "Stand, protect yourself, live." I didn't know how long I stood there, clutching it, but by the time I moved again, I felt something different in my chest. Fear, yes, but also a flicker of something else. A beginning. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the floorboards, every groan of the old house felt like a whisper in the dark, telling me to get up, to move, to do something. At dawn, I pulled on my heavy coat and stepped outside. The sky was still bruised with the last shades of night, and the morning air slapped my face awake. I walked to St. Mary's, the same church I had attended since Daniel was a boy. It felt like I was walking through water, my feet heavy, my breath shaky. When I pushed open the big wooden doors, the hush inside swallowed me whole. The candles flickered along the altar, their flames bending and straightening like they were bowing to some silent music. I took a seat in the second pew, the one I always chose, right beneath the stained glass window of the shepherd. For a while, I couldn't find any words. My lips trembled, but no sound came. I thought of all the times I sat here before, begging for Daniel's fever to break, for his college acceptance letter to come, for him to find someone to love him truly. I had prayed for Casey too. God forgive me, I prayed for that woman even after she first snapped at me, even after the first cruel smirk I caught when she thought I wasn't looking. I kept telling myself love would heal her, that if I stayed kind enough, patient enough, she would soften. Now, in this echoing stillness, I saw the truth so clearly, it almost blinded me. I had spent my whole life trying to earn love, from my husband, from Casey, even from Daniel sometimes. I thought if I gave enough, if I folded every towel perfectly, served every meal hot, kept my opinions to myself, they'd see me, they'd cherish me. But love without respect is a prison. I squeezed my rosary so hard I thought the beads would crack. God, I whispered finally, my voice hoarse, I don't know if I deserve your help. Maybe I made him weak. Maybe I should have taught him to fight harder, to stand up to her. My chest heaved, and for a second I thought I might break right there in the pew. I should have been stronger, I choked. I should have protected him from her bitterness. Maybe he wouldn't have died with that sadness in his eyes. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, slipping down my cheeks and soaking into my collar. I bent forward, forehead touching the back of the pew in front of me, and I stayed like that for what felt like hours. When I finally sat up, I felt emptied out, hollow, but deep inside, beneath the grief, something small flickered to life. A tiny ember. Daniel had left everything to me. Not because he thought I was helpless, but because he wanted me to finally stand on my own, to claim my life without her shadow swallowing me whole. I pressed my palm to my heart and made a promise, my voice steady this time. I will honor your wishes, my boy. I will protect this home, our memories, and I will not let her destroy what you left me. It terrified me, the idea of standing alone, of facing the world without anyone to soften the blows. But I owed it to him. And, maybe for the first time, I owed it to myself. I rose from the pew, my legs unsteady but moving. As I stepped out into the morning light, I felt the warmth of the sun on my face. It didn't chase away all the darkness, but for the first time, I didn't mind carrying some of it with me. When I returned home from the church, the house felt different. Quieter, somehow, but not in that empty, suffocating way it had felt after Daniel died. No, this was a charged silence, the kind that made your heart thud in your ears, waiting for something to shift. I slipped into Daniel's study again, shutting the door softly behind me. The letter from the lawyer burned in my pocket, a hidden shield. I ran my fingers over the stacks of papers on his desk, bills, insurance forms, half-filled notebooks. The clutter of a life abruptly paused. I hesitated, my hands hovering above a thick, leather-bound ledger I'd never seen before. I pulled it closer and opened it, the spine creaking like an old door. My eyes scanned the pages, each line in Daniel's neat handwriting. At first, it looked like ordinary records, mortgage payments, maintenance fees, grocery lists. But as I flipped deeper, something shifted. There it was, a list of accounts, numbers I didn't recognize. Notes scribbled in the margins. For Mom, emergency only, and use if Casey tries anything. My breath caught in my throat. All this time, he had been quietly building a safety net for me, hiding it away where Casey couldn't sniff it out. A tremor ran through my hands as I turned the pages, each entry feeling like a quiet confession, a whispered apology. I couldn't protect you in life, Mom, but I won't leave you defenseless. I pressed my palm to the page, my tears spotting the ink. I didn't even hear the door open behind me until I felt the presence, that heavy, artificial sweetness that always followed Casey around. "Oh, there you are," she cooed, a bright ceramic smile plastered on her face. She held a tray with a steaming cup of tea and a plate of cookies, the kind she always claimed were too fattening for her to touch. I snapped the ledger shut so quickly the sound echoed off the walls. Casey's eyes flickered to the book, then back to me. Her smile didn't move, but I saw the thin line of suspicion behind her lashes. "I thought you might need a little pick-me-up," she chirped, setting the tray down on the corner of the desk. "You've had such a hard few days. You shouldn't be alone so much. I'm here for you." I stared at her, the saccharine words dripping into the silence like poison. She pulled up a chair without waiting for my permission and perched on it daintily, folding her hands in her lap like a child at a piano recital. "We should really start talking about the future," she began. "I know this whole inheritance mess is confusing, but I can help. We can work together. Maybe you could even transfer some of the accounts to me now, so you don't have to worry." There it was, her real voice slipping through the cracks. I felt my jaw tighten, my hands clenching in my lap, my heart pounded, but instead of fear, it felt like a drumbeat of something new. I looked her straight in the eyes. For the first time, I didn't lower my gaze. "Thank you for the tea," I said slowly, my voice low but steady. "But I'm fine on my own." A flicker of annoyance flashed across her face before she smoothed it away. She forced a little laugh. "Oh, Margaret, don't be silly. We're family. We have to trust each other, right?" Trust. That word felt like acid on my tongue. I gave her the smallest, coldest smile I could manage. "I'll let you know if I need help," I said, each word deliberate, heavy. Casey sat there for a moment longer, her fingers twitching on her lap. Then she stood, abruptly, her chair scraping against the wood floor with a screech that set my teeth on edge. "Of course," she said tightly, her voice losing its honey. "Just think about it." She left the room without looking back. When the door clicked shut, I released a breath I didn't know I was holding. I turned back to the ledger, my fingertips tracing Daniel's handwriting like a lifeline. I wasn't alone. Not really. I had my son's quiet strength woven into every line of those pages. And now, finally, I had my own voice beginning to rise. The next afternoon, I heard the doorbell ring while I was tending to my roses out back. At first, I thought it might be another neighbor dropping off condolences, another awkward hug and a dish I'd never return. But then I heard Casey's bright, sugary laugh slicing through the hallway, sharp as broken glass. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped closer to the window. That's when I saw him, a man in a stiff gray suit, briefcase in hand. The kind of man who smelled like ink and threats. They moved into the den together, Casey fluttering around like a crow in silk. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering in my chest, and strained to hear. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," she purred. I don't know what to do with her anymore." Her voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. "She's not well," Casey continued. "She's confused all the time. She talks to herself in the garden. She's completely alone in that big house. It isn't safe for her, or for anyone else." The lawyer made a low sound, something between a grunt and a hum of agreement. Casey pressed on. "I'm worried she might hurt herself, or start giving away money irresponsibly. We need to get ahead of it, you understand? She needs a guardian. Someone competent." She let out a soft, fake sigh. "I just want what's best for her, of course." A sick wave of heat rolled up my neck, my skin prickling, as if ants were crawling beneath it. They wanted to erase me, reduce me to a helpless old woman, too fragile to make her own choices. Take away the last thing I had left, my independence. I pressed my forehead to the cool plaster of the wall, fighting to keep my breathing quiet. Every word felt like a dagger twisting deeper. "Do you think the court will grant it?" Casey asked, her voice bright with barely contained excitement. "With enough evidence, yes," the lawyer replied. "We'll need to document her confusion, any reckless behavior. We can have her evaluated by a psychiatrist if necessary. Judges are cautious about elderly people managing large assets." My nails dug into my palms until I felt the sting of broken skin. Confused, reckless. That's how they saw me. That's how they would present me to the world. A burden, a fragile creature to be caged and managed. I backed away slowly, every step heavy, my breath ragged. I stumbled into the kitchen and collapsed into the chair at the table. My mind swirled with images. My roses, Daniel's trophies, the smell of fresh bread in the oven, the echo of his laughter when he ran down the hall as a boy. I couldn't lose this. Not to her. A part of me wanted to march into that den and scream until my voice split open. But I knew better. Casey would twist every word, paint me as hysterical. She was counting on it. Instead, I sat there, staring at my trembling hands, the blood from my palms slowly pooling in the creases of my skin. I needed a plan. Proof that I was not the feeble old woman they wanted me to be. I forced myself to breathe, to steady my shaking fingers. My son had trusted me to protect what he left, and I wasn't going to let him down. Outside the kitchen window, the late afternoon sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the roses. I closed my eyes and whispered into the growing dark. Not this time. Not me. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my journal and recorder, stacked neatly beside my tea. I flipped open my address book, the one with pages yellowed from years of grocery lists and forgotten birthday cards. My fingers hesitated on one name, Arthur Thatcher, my late husband's brother, a man I hadn't spoken to in years. After my husband passed, Arthur tried to help, but grief swallowed me whole back then. I pushed everyone away, too proud or too broken to let him in. He eventually stopped calling, and I let him fade into the background, another sacrifice on the altar of survival. But I knew one thing about Arthur. He was once a respected judge. Even in retirement, he carried an aura of authority that made people listen. I called him before I could talk myself out of it. "Margaret?" His deep, gravelly voice boomed across the line, as though no time had passed at all. "It's me," I said, my voice small. A heavy pause. "Well, I'll be damned," he said finally, his tone softening. "What can I do for you, sister?" I swallowed hard, the words clawing their way up my throat. "I need help, legal help." We agreed to meet that afternoon at Connie's Diner, a place frozen in the 60s, with cracked red leather booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked since Reagan. When I walked in, Arthur was already there, his old wool coat draped across the booth beside him. His hair was thinner than I remembered, but his eyes, those sharp hawk-like eyes, still gleamed. He stood and pulled me into a hug before I could protest. I sank into it, all my pride crumbling for a moment. We sat. A waitress dropped off 2 coffees without asking, as if she'd known we needed them. I told him everything. Casey's plan to declare me incompetent. The lawyer, the whispering, the threats. I laid my journal on the table, slid the recorder across to him. Arthur listened, silent except for the occasional nod. His jaw tightened with each new detail, his knuckles whitening around the coffee mug. When I finished, I felt like I'd run a marathon. My heart thudded in my throat, my hands trembling in my lap. He pushed his glasses up his nose and leaned in. "She thinks she's clever," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "But you've been gathering exactly what you need. Documentation, evidence of your mental clarity, recordings, journal entries. This is gold, Margaret." I felt my shoulders sag in relief. "Here's what we're going to do," he continued, his finger tapping the table rhythmically. "First, we secure these records somewhere safe, outside the house. Second, I'll draft a letter formally stating your capacity to manage your affairs. I can have a friend, a retired psychiatrist, do an informal evaluation if we need extra support. We make her case against you impossible before she even files it." Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back. "I don't know how to thank you," I whispered. Arthur shook his head. "Don't thank me. I should have been there for you years ago. You won't face this alone, Margaret. Not this time." We sat in that booth for another hour, hashing out details between bites of stale pie and sips of lukewarm coffee. When I finally stood to leave, Arthur squeezed my hand hard, his eyes locking onto mine. "Remember," he said, "quiet doesn't mean weak. You've always had a spine stronger than any steel I've seen in that courtroom." On the walk back to my car, the late afternoon sun dipped low, painting the cracked sidewalks gold. For the first time in decades, I felt the warmth of real support wrapping around me, like a quilt stitched from pieces of a life I thought I'd lost. And under that warmth, the cold seed of resolve began to grow roots. That night, after meeting Arthur, I came home feeling as if my bones carried new weight. I turned on the hall light and stood in the narrow mirror at the end of the corridor, the same mirror Daniel used to straighten his tie before school dances, the same mirror Casey used to check her makeup before dinner parties. I stared at myself, really stared. My hair, once dark and thick, now streaked with gray and pulled back in a loose bun. Deep lines cut across my forehead, beside my mouth. My eyes looked tired, swollen from too many nights crying into a cold pillow. But underneath all that, beneath the layers of shame, grief, and silent submission, I saw something else. A flicker. A spark. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the glass. All these years, I thought survival meant keeping quiet, keeping the peace. I believed that if I gave enough of my money, my patience, my silence, they'd love me. They'd choose me. I thought back to Daniel's last weeks, the way he avoided Casey's eyes when she snapped, the way he lingered in the garden longer than usual, how he left extra groceries in the pantry when she wasn't looking, how he always hugged me twice before he left for work. Those were quiet messages. Apologies he couldn't say out loud. He knew. He saw her. He saw me. He didn't leave everything to me because he thought I was helpless. He did it because he wanted to set me free. I pressed my palms to the mirror, my forehead dropping against the cold glass. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I see it now. I see what you were trying to tell me." For the first time in so long, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt chosen, trusted. A small sob shook my shoulders, but it wasn't the kind that left me hollow. It felt like a wave crashing through old, rotting walls. I stood up straighter, my hands still pressed against the mirror. My reflection wavered through tears, but I held her gaze. "I won't let you down," I whispered. "I promise." The words echoed through the narrow hallway, as if the house itself was listening. I wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my cardigan and took a deep breath that rattled all the way down to my toes. Casey thought she was fighting an old, broken woman. A weak, timid mother-in-law she could push aside, with one crooked smile and a lawyer's signature. She didn't know I had finally stepped into the woman my son believed I could be. I turned away from the mirror and walked slowly down the hall, past the faded family photos, past the empty coat rack where Daniel's jackets used to hang. When I reached the kitchen, I pulled out my journal and wrote down the words I had spoken to the mirror. I let the ink sink deep into the paper, imagining each letter anchoring me, stitching my spine back together. I closed the book and pressed my palm against its cover, like sealing a vow. I had been quiet my whole life, but quiet didn't mean weak. And tonight, for the first time, I felt strong enough to carry both my grief and my rage. I would carry them into the battle ahead, for my son, for my home, and finally, for myself. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table long before dawn, the sky outside still ink black. I laid out sheets of paper, my journal, Daniel's ledger, and the small stack of legal forms Arthur had helped me prepare. My hands trembled as I wrote, but not from fear, from purpose. I started with my will. It felt strange at first, writing down my final wishes while my heart was still raw and pulsing with new life. But it wasn't death I was planning for. It was freedom. I made it clear, line after line, that Casey would receive nothing. No house, no bank accounts, not a single chipped teacup. Instead, I set up a trust in Daniel's name for the local orphanage downtown, the same place he had volunteered during college, where he spent afternoons reading to children who looked at him like he was the sun. I could almost hear him laughing as he recounted their wild stories, the way they climbed all over him, the way he always came home smelling of crayons and peanut butter. I signed every page deliberately, each stroke of the pen echoing in my chest like a drumbeat. Once everything was finished, I folded the documents and slipped them into a thick manila envelope. I stood, my knees aching, and carried it into my bedroom. There, in the corner of my closet, sat my old sewing box, a battered wooden chest covered in scratches and old yarn stickers Daniel had plastered on it when he was 5. I lifted the lid, the scent of lavender sachets, old thread, and time spilled out. I pressed the envelope inside, tucking it beneath piles of fabric scraps and unfinished quilt squares. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might echo through the walls. Just as I closed the lid, I heard Casey's sharp voice echoing down the hall. "Margaret, dinner. What is taking so long?" The sound of her heels clacked like gunshots on the hardwood floors. I pressed my palm against the sewing box, steadying my breath. For a moment, fear threatened to crawl back into my bones, whispering to just give in, to keep the peace. But then I pictured Daniel's face. That sweet, crooked grin, the pride shining in his eyes when he built his first bookshelf for me. I squared my shoulders, stood up, and moved toward the door. She banged again, harder this time. "Did you fall asleep in there? Are you deaf?" I opened the door slowly. Casey stood there, arms crossed, lips curled into that familiar sneer. "I'm not making dinner tonight," I said, my voice as calm as the still air before a storm. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on a dock. "What did you say?" she snapped, stepping forward as if to loom over me. I didn't flinch. "You heard me," I repeated. "I won't cook for you, or clean, or run this house for you. Not anymore." A flush crept up her neck, her eyes bulging in shock and rage. I almost felt sorry for her, watching her realize her puppet wasn't going to dance anymore. Almost. She opened her mouth to spit another insult, but I stepped past her before she could form the words. As I walked down the hallway, each footstep felt stronger, heavier, more mine. Behind me, I heard her scream echo against the walls, but this time, her voice didn't make me shrink. It made me stand taller. I reached the kitchen, turned off the lights, and pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. Tonight, I would eat alone, in peace. And upstairs, hidden in an old sewing box, my quiet revolution waited, ready to rise when the time came. I waited until Casey left the next afternoon. She stomped out in a cloud of expensive perfume, muttering something about retail therapy and needing to escape this mausoleum. The moment I heard her car pull away, I moved. I didn't hesitate. I didn't sit down to second guess or whisper prayers for strength. I had prayed enough. Now it was time to act. I pulled black trash bags from under the sink, the heavy-duty kind Daniel used to rake leaves in the fall. One by one, I went into her room. Her clothes, her designer shoes, her endless bottles of overpriced creams. All of it, bagged and tied without a single pang of guilt. Each item felt like a stone lifting off my chest. The anger I once swallowed down with burnt coffee and forced smiles now flowed through me like a quiet river, steady and unstoppable. In the back of her closet, I found a framed photo of her and Daniel. She was beaming, clinging to his arm. He looked tired, his smile thin and polite. I set the frame aside, staring at it for a long moment. My fingers brushed the glass, but there was no warmth left in it. Only a hollow echo of the man she tried to claim as a trophy. Finally, I wrapped it in an old towel and placed it gently on top of the last bag. Once everything was gathered, I dragged the bags out to the porch. The sun was setting, smearing streaks of orange and purple across the sky. I stood at the front door, breathing in the sharp evening air, feeling it burn through my lungs like medicine. Then I moved to the locks. Daniel had insisted on installing heavy-duty locks years ago, after a neighbor's house was broken into. He taught me how to change them, though I never thought I'd need that lesson. I fumbled at first, my fingers clumsy from age and cold, but I kept at it. Slowly, I felt the grooves click into place, each turn of the screwdriver steadying my heartbeat. When the last screws slid in, I stepped back, gripping the new keys in my fist. For a moment, I didn't move. I just stood there on the porch, the dark pressing close around me, the bags piled like a final verdict. I sank into the old rocking chair Daniel had repaired for me years ago, the one Casey always mocked for being an eyesore. I let my body relax into its curves, the wood groaning softly beneath me like an old friend. The keys weighed heavy in my palm. I thought of Daniel, how he used to run up these steps after soccer practice, how he'd sit next to me on this chair when he was too big to fit in my lap but still wanted to be close. I thought of all the meals I cooked in that kitchen, all the nights I waited up for him, all the mornings I watched him leave for work with that gentle kiss on my forehead. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in that rocking chair, my fingers tight around the keys, listening to the cicadas sing their sharp, endless song. It was nearly midnight when I heard the sound of her car tires on the gravel. The headlights swung across the bags, piled at the edge of the porch. She slammed the brakes so hard I heard the tires screech. Then, the car door flung open. "What is this?" Her voice cut through the night like a siren, echoing down the block. I stood slowly, stepping forward until I felt the cold wood of the porch rail against my knees. Casey stumbled toward the bags, her designer heels sinking into the damp grass. She grabbed a bag, ripped it open, a sequined dress spilling into the dirt. "Are you insane?" she shrieked. "You think you can just throw me out? You old, senile witch!" Porch lights flicked on up and down the street. Curtains shifted. Shadows moved behind windows. I kept my gaze steady on her. "You don't live here anymore," I said, each word heavy, unwavering. "You never did. Not really. This house was my son's, and now it is mine." Her eyes darted wildly, her chest heaving. "You can't do this," she screamed. "I'll call the police. I'll tell them you're unstable, that you attacked me." I almost laughed. The sound stuck somewhere deep in my chest, half sadness, half release. "Call them," I said calmly. "Tell them everything. The will is clear. The house, the assets, everything belongs to me. You have no legal claim. None." Her phone was already in her shaking hand, her thumb hovering over the screen. But she didn't press it. She looked up at me, truly looked, and for the first time, I saw something raw in her eyes. Fear. The neighbors' porches were filling. I saw old Mr. Alvarez standing on his steps in his robe, Mrs. Carter peeking out from behind her screen door, her dog barking frantically at her ankles. Casey's voice wavered as she glanced around. You can't do this to me. I gave him my life." I stepped down onto the top porch step, my hand gripping the rail. "No," I said, my voice low but steady. "You drained him. You took and gave nothing back but bitterness. You loved his money, his name, but you never loved him. And you certainly never loved me." Her mouth opened and shut, her face flushing red. "You don't get to stay here," I continued, feeling my heartbeat rise like a drum in my ears. "You don't get to rewrite this story anymore. I won't let you." Her hands fell to her sides, her phone slipping into the wet grass. Her shoulders slumped as if I had struck her. For a moment, the entire street seemed to hold its breath. Then she let out a strangled, guttural cry, grabbing at the bags, yanking them toward her as if she could pull her life back from the edge. I didn't move. I didn't offer help. I stood there and watched. As she gathered her things, stumbling in her expensive shoes, the quiet realization fell over her. She had no power left here. Not over me. Not over this home. The old rocking chair creaked behind me, swaying slightly in the breeze as if it, too, was watching. When she finally shoved the last bag into her trunk, she turned to me, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice hoarse. "You'll die alone in this house. Just wait." I met her eyes one last time. "Being alone is better than being used," I said. She stared at me, wild and small, before slamming the car door and tearing off into the night, her tires spitting gravel like angry spit. The street slowly returned to its silence. One by one, porch lights turned off. I stepped back onto my porch and let out a long, slow breath. The keys felt light in my hand now. I turned, sat back in the rocking chair, and for the first time in decades, I felt the porch settle beneath me like a friend welcoming me home. I thought it was over. I thought I had finally exorcised her poison from these walls, from my lungs, from my bones. But the next morning, just as the sun slipped over the hedges and painted the garden in soft gold, I heard the sharp knock at the door. I opened it, expecting maybe Arthur or a neighbor checking in after the chaos. But there she was. Casey stood on the porch, her hair wild, mascara smeared, eyes wide and feverish. Her arms were wrapped protectively across her stomach. I felt my breath catch, my fingers curling against the doorframe. She didn't wait for me to speak. "I'm pregnant," she blurted out, her voice raw and shaky. "It's Daniel's. You can't throw me out. This is his child. I have a right to stay. I have a right to everything he left behind." The words slammed into me so hard, I nearly staggered backward. Pregnant. A child. Daniel's child. The air seemed to vanish from the porch. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself, my knees buckling, my mind reeling. Was it true? Could it be? My son's blood. A small, new piece of him, standing right here, hidden behind this woman's manipulations? My eyes darted to her stomach, to her trembling hands. Some deep, old instinct in me wanted to reach out, to protect, to cradle. But another voice, stronger now, sharper, screamed caution. She saw the flicker of doubt cross my face. She pounced on it, stepping closer. "You wouldn't turn your grandchild out into the street, would you?" she demanded, her voice pitching higher, hysteria spilling from her lips. "This baby deserves this home. Daniel would have wanted us to be here. To be safe." Her words tangled in my head like barbed wire. I could almost hear Daniel's laughter in the garden, see him balancing on the porch rail as a boy, calling for me to watch him. I shook my head, trying to steady my breath. How do I know it's true?" I whispered, my voice breaking. Casey's eyes widened, fury flaring. "You dare question me? After everything? You think I would lie about something like this?" I stared at her, searching her face, her wild eyes, the quiver in her lip, looking for a trace of softness, a thread of truth. But all I saw was desperation, greed. The streetlight from the corner flickered, casting long shadows across her face, warping her features into something almost unrecognizable. "I'll go to court," she threatened, stepping even closer. "I'll tell them you threw out the mother of your grandchild, that you're heartless, incompetent. You'll lose everything, and I'll make sure of it." My hand flew to my chest, the blood roaring in my ears. A child. My son's child. Or another lie. Another trap. I tried to find my voice, to push words past the terror rising in my throat. If there is a child," I said slowly, forcing each word out, "I would never turn them away. But I want proof, documents, a doctor's confirmation." Casey's mouth dropped open, her entire body vibrating with rage. "You think you can demand things from me?" she screamed. "You think you hold the power here?" I stepped back into the doorway, gripping the frame until my knuckles burned. "This house is mine," I said, my voice low, trembling but firm. "I will not be manipulated again. If there's a child, we'll handle it properly. But you will not stay here, not like this." Her eyes glimmered with something dangerous. A cornered animal ready to bite. The world seemed to hold its breath. And in that charged silence, I felt the old fear fight to claw its way back into my bones. But this time, I didn't let it in. I stood there, facing her, the ghosts of my past swirling around us. Casey's lips curled into a cruel, jagged smile as she backed down the steps, her voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her gaze slicing into me. "I swear it." Then she turned and vanished into the night, her shadow stretching long and thin across the driveway before it disappeared. I stood frozen, my breath coming in shallow gasps, the air heavy with a new, unbearable uncertainty. I didn't know if she was telling the truth, but I knew one thing. I wasn't done fighting yet. I didn't sleep after Casey's threat. All night, I paced the hallway, the echoes of my footsteps sounding like a heartbeat I couldn't calm. I imagined a child, Daniel's child, toddling through the garden, laughing in the kitchen, tracing the same cracks in the porch as he once did. I wanted to believe. God, I wanted to believe. But I knew better. By sunrise, I had made my decision. When Casey came storming up the walkway later that morning, eyes wild, hair tangled, I was waiting for her on the porch, arms crossed, journal and recorder resting on the rocker beside me like silent guards. She didn't even bother knocking this time. "You heartless witch!" she screamed before she reached the steps. "How dare you question me? I'm carrying your grandchild, and you act like I'm some stranger off the street?" I stayed silent. Neighbors started appearing. Mrs. Carter on her porch with her yapping dog, old Mr. Alvarez leaning on his cane, a young couple across the street peeking through parted blinds. I lifted my chin. I told you yesterday. If you're truly pregnant with my son's child, I will help. But I need proof. A doctor's note, an ultrasound, anything real. Her face twisted, rage and panic battling under her skin. You think you can humiliate me? She shrieked, spittle flying. You think you can treat me like garbage and get away with it? I gave him everything. I took a small step forward, my voice quiet but sharp as a blade. Did you give him love, Casey? Or did you drain him like you've tried to drain me? She flinched, just for a second. Enough for me to see it. Her eyes darted to the neighbors gathering closer, some of them now openly holding up phones, recording. Show me the proof, I demanded again. Or leave. Casey's breathing turned ragged. Her eyes darted around wildly, as though looking for an escape route. Then, in one swift, ugly moment, her shoulders sagged. She let out a strangled laugh, high and hollow. There is no baby, she screamed, her voice cracking into something pitiful. Are you happy now? I made it up, all of it. I thought if I said I was pregnant, you'd cave. You'd give me the house, the money. Everything. You always were so soft, so easy to manipulate. A stunned hush fell over the street. I felt the air shift, heavy with shock and disgust. Mrs. Carter's hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Alvarez shook his head slowly, his cane trembling under his grip. I stood there, feeling the weight lift from my chest in one sharp exhale. Casey fell to her knees on the walkway, sobbing, tearing at her hair. It was supposed to be mine. All of it. You don't deserve it. You were never good enough. I deserved it. I deserved him. The porch felt like a stage, and for the first time, I wasn't the one crumbling under the spotlight. I didn't move toward her. I didn't speak. I let her drown in her own confession, in front of the very community she once charmed with forced smiles and expensive dresses. Finally, she looked up at me, eyes bloodshot and wild. Please, she gasped. Please don't let them see me like this. Help me. I stared at her, really saw her, small and trembling and powerless. No, I said, my voice clear, almost gentle. You only miss me, now that I said no. She let out one last broken wail, then staggered to her feet, clutching the last shreds of her pride as she ran down the street, stumbling, the neighbors' cameras following her every move. I stood alone on the porch as the final echoes of her cries faded. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt real, solid, whole for the first time in decades. The neighbors slowly turned away, their faces pale and stunned. I sank into my rocker, my hands trembling, and closed my eyes.